The question you have to ask is, should the US government be responsible for propping up an entire industry even if we don't need their goods? And how long do you do that?
BAE Systems has a very strong connection to Pennsylvania. We operate at 2 major sites, including one of the largest in the country in York, Pennsylvania. The Bradley fighting vehicle is one of the military's tracked armored vehicles, tracked like a tank. The Bradley is not a tank. A tank is a very specific type of vehicle to do a specific job. Bradley does another job. Its primary job is to move troops safely into a battle zone and bring them back out. There are 2 facilities in the nation that make armored tracked combat vehicles. One company in the state of Ohio. Every other tracked armored vehicle used by soldiers and Marines is built here in Pennsylvania. The winding down of the war in Iraq, and as combat operations are scheduled to ramp down in Afghanistan, that's a significant issue. In terms of cuts in defense spending, we're looking at a planned shutdown of the Bradley assembly line for 3 years, starting in mid-2014. The people who build those have very specific skill sets that you don't find in the civilian market. For example, ballistic armor welding. You don't go to school for that. You come into the trade and you learn it. When we have cuts in defense spending, it's not just that dollar figure that you're going to save by shutting down the line, but what are the associated costs? The cost to restart that line, the cost to retrain those ballistic armor welders. And you have to take all of that account in order to reach the true number that you're looking at when you talk about shutting a line down. If this production break happens, the impacts could potentially be up to 7,000 jobs lost across 44 states. It's real people, it's real lives, and a lot of it is small business. We have never, we would never ask to build stuff that the military doesn't need just to protect jobs. We are asking them to retrofit vehicles that they've already identified their own stated need, just pull that forward in time so we can do the work during that shutdown and thereby keep that production line warm, keep those skill sets in place, the employees in place.
Part of the problem is when you had World War II and you had the big ramp up in American industrial production of weapons, you were taking basically a commercial sector that was geared towards building automobiles and civilian airliners and so on, and they sort of converted to wartime production. But what you've had over the course of the last several decades is companies that are almost entirely dependent on defense contracts for survival. The question you have to ask is, should the US government be responsible for propping up an entire industry even if we don't need their goods? And how long do you do that? Spending at the Department of Defense should be based on national security needs, not jobs in people's districts or campaign contributions. It should be based on genuine threats and what the Defense Department thinks we need to meet those threats. So every dollar that goes towards an unneeded weapon system or a wasteful weapon system might be depriving the Air Force, the Army, the Marines, the Navy of a dollar that could be going towards a weapon system that they do think we need. It also could be depriving schools from funding or healthcare from being fully funded. It could be depriving Americans of clean energy research. So it can affect both our real national security priorities and our domestic priorities as well.
In the United States, there's less than 1,000 what we call super factories left in the country. That's a place of employment with 1,000 people or more. And a town like Johnstown at one time was a place that housed a super factory. All those people lived in this community and relied upon that one key industry. So when one key business like basic materials or steel goes out of business, then that impacts the entire community. So we're seeing some holes start to emerge in the national defense supply chain. We have the Hellfire missile. The solid fuel propellant, there's a chemical in there that is no longer made in this country. We have to buy overseas. If that supplier chooses to not give us the supply anymore, we lose the ability to fire the Hellfire missile. There's a large chance that our national defense could be weakened simply by going offshore. In defense manufacturing, you have big primary suppliers that the government buys a tank from. Those companies have tier 2 suppliers that sell tracks for tanks, and tier 3 suppliers that sell bolts to put tracks together to sell to the tank companies, to ultimately you see the government buying the finished product.
We're at AMZ in York, PA. We're a finishing processor for materials for defense. We don't manufacture anything. We finish the parts that are made at various machine shops, the suppliers to the defense industry or the defense company themselves. It's perceived as less painful if somebody says, oh, BAE is gonna lay off 1,000 people. Oh, well, that's BAE, they're so big. They'll just survive and make it up some other way. But what they don't understand is from every big company job that's lost, down the whole way you start following that thread, and you'll find 3 or 4 more jobs that are lost down the line when it can't be produced. This plant is 85% military. These parts happen to be for the Bradley and the M88 vehicles. Bradley alone is probably 40% of what we do here. We got the poster as an award from BAE for on-time delivery and quality of parts. A late delivery meant that there was a vehicle that didn't get there, and maybe somebody was put in danger because they didn't get their equipment that day. And you'll see some of the shirts around here that on the back it says "One Team, One Mission." Everyone, as this plant had evolved, knew someone who was in the service. There are some veterans here.
I'm Jason Graves, material manager here at AMZ Manufacturing. I actually used to drive the Abrams tank. You know, being a former soldier myself, I can really appreciate how important it is with the things that we do here. There's a huge fear factor whenever you see a tank like those, you know, roll up on you. I mean, they shake the ground, and it's really demoralizing to whoever you're fighting. BAE will send us lists of parts that they need to make sure that their lines are going to continue to run. But the volume has definitely dropped off compared to 2-3 years ago. It's a lot less. You know, with the lower volumes, you know, of course, you don't need as many people.
Things like the paint on the vehicle. It's very specialized paint. You know, it provides a degree of protection against chemical weapons, for example. That's not stuff you can buy off the shelf at Home Depot. It costs a lot of money and takes time for a supplier to be qualified.
When somebody walks out of here who's a painter, that it took me a year to be able to know that they could handle the mixing and spraying of this paint. And maybe, you know, we'd find a way to survive, but then when the need comes on the backside, these people aren't going to be available. They're going to be having taken other jobs to provide for their own lives. And now we're faced with the cost of retraining, the cost of all of what we have to put back in place to be able to do these parts.
So one strategy is diversify in the field of government contracts. Another strategy is to go back and be competitive in the commercial marketplace for civilians. Although a lot of defense contractors find that difficult because you have the discipline of the market all of a sudden. If you're in the commercial marketplace, customers will drop you if they don't like your product. Whereas with the US government, we get poor products all the time, but we're dependent on those companies, and so we don't drop them. Then another strategy is foreign sales, which you're definitely seeing more of. And the Obama administration is hawking a lot of US weapon systems to foreign countries, and we totally dominate the global weapons export market. Partly because we know we're ramping down the spending on our own defense contractors, but we want them to survive, so we're trying to hawk their wares to other countries. They may not be going to our closest, allies. They may be going to regimes in the Middle East, or in Asia or elsewhere where it might be a little bit more unstable, and we might not be happy about who ends up with those weapons. That dollar that's going towards a government contractor in Johnstown could be going towards a university in Johnstown for clean energy research. That could be supporting jobs as well. Or you could convert some of those facilities towards building photovoltaic cells or batteries for advanced electric cars. There's no reason why it has to be for a weapon per se, if you are going to use government spending to create jobs.
I don't see world peace like anytime soon on the horizon, so I would think that with a lot of the crazy stuff that's going on, that it would just be prudent to be able to protect ourselves and protect the interest of anyone who's our friend out there who can't protect themselves.
It's easy just to say, oh, it's a tank, we don't need an extra tank, what do you need that for? But I think the United States has to be ready with any threat. It's one of those things that I don't think you can really put a value on, our way of life.